الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah we'll go ahead and start. And today we'll be going over 3 hadith. So instead of 1 we're going over 3. Because again we want to finish all 40 by the time we finish this semester inshallah. But also these hadith are very short and it's very related to topics we spoke about before, almost completely overlapping. So inshallah it shouldn't be too long. Hadith number 11. عن أبي محمد الحسن بن علي بن أبي طالب صبط رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وريحانته رضي الله عنهما قال حفظت من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك رواه الترمذي والنسائي وقال الترمذي حديث حسن صحيح. On the authority of Abu Muhammad al-Hasan bin Ali bin Abi Talib رضي الله عنه, the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the one much loved by him, who said, I memorized from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, leave that which makes you doubt for that which does not make you doubt. And this was said by Tirmidhi to be a Hasan hadith, Hasan Sahih. Now, there's only, again, this is a repetition of, as you guys can see from previous hadith, very highly overlapping. But this one is, the first point that's repeated, actually we'll go over that first, which is that from the excellence or the completeness of Iman is again to leave that which makes you doubt. And so if you see, like we spoke about before, anything that's mutashabih or mushtabih, meaning something that's doubtful to you, or you can't tell a difference whether it's halal, is it haram, that's something you should leave. That avoid a lot of doubt, because some of the doubt might be ithm. So again, to repeat, why are we avoiding a lot of doubt, if not all of doubt? Because part of it might be ithm. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say that all doubt is going to be ithm, that all doubt is going to be bad deeds, but rather part of it could be ithm. So therefore, we're commanded to stay away from doubt in general. Now, the second point, which is, maybe this is a little bit new, maybe, but again, we kind of went over this, which is that from this hadith is derived a principle called al-yaqeen la yuzalu bil-shak. That yaqeen, which is like certainty, that which is 100%, it cannot be removed with something called shak or dhan, which is like doubt. So for example, if you're doing wudu, or actually let's say you complete your wudu and you pray dhuhr, for example, and now asr time comes around and you forget, did I do wudu, or you forget, did I lose my wudu, did I not lose my wudu? You don't remember. So you have a doubt in your mind that did I lose my wudu or did I not? But you know for a fact you did wudu. This hadith, what's derived from it, is that you don't have to do wudu again. And you go based off of the yaqeen, and the yaqeen, the certainty is, you did do wudu, so therefore you don't do wudu again. So and this applies in areas of salah, wudu, etc., and throughout other ibadat. So we'll end this hadith off with that, and we'll move on to the second one, which is hadith number 12. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه حديث حسن رواه الترمذي وابن ماجه. On the authority of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه said that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, part of the perfection of one's Islam is his leaving that which does not concern him. And this is a Hasan, good hadith related by Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah. Now, this hadith is a very, very important one, right? And there's 2 things that have to be understood from this. The first one is that it's speaking about completing or perfecting our Islam. Because we know that Islam is not a religion where just because you say La ilaha illallah, that therefore you're guaranteed for sure that you will be in the highest levels of Jannah and you will receive the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know the hadith says, Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala Jannah. The one who says La ilaha illallah, and obviously with sincerity, then he enters Jannah. We understand this hadith. But that doesn't mean he's saved from going to Jahannam first. And that's why Rasulullah mentions, Min husni islam al-mar'i. So from the ihsan, from the perfection, from the excellence of one's Islam, is tarkuhu ma la ya'ni, to leave that which does not concern him. And again, the obvious examples that we can give here is speaking about ghanima, namima, and buhtan. And I'll go a little bit into detail with the three of these to explain the difference. So ghanima, ghiba, ghiba, which is to backbite, right? Which commonly translated backbiting. The difference between that and namima or buhtan, they're both very similar, is that ghiba is to say something true, which is accurate, about someone behind their back, even though you know they wouldn't want you to say it in front of them. So that's the difference here. Versus namima or buhtan, which is, you could translate to slander, that's to say something which isn't true about someone behind their back, and of course they wouldn't like to hear that, and it's not even true in the first place. So these two things are something that this hadith is telling us very, very clearly to leave off. And why? Because if we look at it from like a reality perspective, a lot of the times this idea of gossip and drama, etc., is something that's very, very it's like attractive. It's like you always want to talk about it. Like as soon as someone says, "Oh, did you hear what happened?" It's like, "Oh, I want to know what happened, 100%." Like this is like it's like we jump to ask, even though we know it has nothing to do with us. It's not going to be beneficial for us. It's not something that we need to know about, right? And even if it's something that's true, like if we take for example, like someone might come up to you and be like, "Oh, hey, did you hear what this sheikh said or what that sheikh said, or did you hear what he said, she said?" Right? If it's something that concerns you, for example, let's say you're inviting that speaker over for a talk, or you're bringing that, or maybe you're thinking about, for example, you're asking about that person for marriage. So you want to know about that person, right? Of course, at that point, it's important to know and you verify. So it's important to know what the person is saying, but also second, you verify, which might even be more important than the first. Because someone might say something, or someone might have a perspective on someone which might not be accurate. So that verifying portion is very, very important. But most of the time, and I want to say even like 90% of the time, it's something that doesn't concern us, doesn't benefit us, that we don't need to know, and it's something that is kind of just like it's like a pastime. It's for fun. It's something that's interesting to hear, and it's interesting to get involved in and to hear about that quote unquote drama. When in reality, that drama doesn't contribute anything to your iman. It doesn't bring you closer to Jannah. And that measure needs to be there for all our actions. If we think about how to apply this hadith, right? If we repeat it, min husni islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni. From the excellence or the ihsan of the person, of the human, is to leave that which does not concern him. The best application of this is to just memorize one thing and keep it in our minds, which is that our measure for whether something concerns us or not is, will it bring me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bring me closer to Jannah? If it's something that isn't, then this is something that it doesn't concern me. And if we go into more details, right? Because this can take different rulings, right? Like for example, if someone is sinning in public or doing some kind of evil, then you must of course forbid the evil. We understand this. So in this case, even though it's something that isn't directly concerning you, what's concerning you is you seeing the evil, and therefore Rasulullah mentions, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." Whoever of you sees an evil, then you have to change it with your hand, and then your tongue, and then your heart, right? So that's one end. Now, at the same time, you might have, for example, a time where something that doesn't concern you, but it's still mubah to ask about or to get into. Like for example, if you're like small talk with a friend and you're asking like, "Oh, how was your trip? How was this? How was that?" As long as this isn't something that you're putting like the person's annoyed, or the person is like you're inquiring into things that's too much detail or private, etc. And the person is getting annoyed. Of course, in that case, that's something that you shouldn't be doing. And that this hadith would apply on that. You need to stay away from it. But in those kind of things, of course, this is more than fine. And then, of course, it could be haram. In the sense that, like I mentioned before, that this person, you're inquiring into his private life. And again, this is something that especially with Muslims you can't do, right? And the Quran says, وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. So before mentioning backbiting, it mentions وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا, and do not spy on one another, right? And inquiring into someone's private life is a form of spying. So the last point I want to mention on this hadith is that in general, we shouldn't be interested in knowing every drama or every fault or everything that goes wrong or goes bad in someone or anything that's quote unquote interesting, etc., that happens around us. Rather, our measure for whether we're interested in knowing something is based off whether this is something that is beneficial to us, meaning it'll get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it actually does concern us. Now, for the last hadith we'll go over today, hadith number 13, عن أبي حمزة أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه خادم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه رواه البخاري ومسلم. On the authority of Abu Hamza, Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anh, the servant of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother that which he loves for himself, related in Bukhari and Muslim. So this hadith is also, again, like very, very short, very, very like concise wording, but it has a lot of depth and a lot of meaning. And I'm almost 100% sure that most of us in this room have heard this hadith before. But what's interesting about the human being is that he might hear the best of speech, he might hear the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he might hear it repeated to him over and over again, but he might not follow it. And he might not apply it. Or, because he's insan, he's forgetful, he might hear it and apply it and then forget about it. So one thing to understand from this hadith is that this is like a lifelong journey of building within yourself this love for yourself, that which you love for everyone else as well. So I can't want for myself, the best of blessings, the best car, the best house, etc., and not want that for someone else. And within this, you get, you can speak about hasad, you can speak about all these different kind of topics. But what I want to focus on is a very simple idea, which is the idea of empathy, or putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Because if we were to summarize this hadith in one word, it would really be empathy. Putting yourself in the other person's shoes and saying, how would I feel, or what would I want in that situation? And the applications for this are a lot, right? Like, for example, if someone is going through something hard, or for example, they're struggling in something, if you put yourself in their shoes, they would want you to help them, especially if you have a skill set, or if you have knowledge, or if you have etc., access to something that can help them. So if you were in their shoes, you would want that person to help you. So and then again, that's where the hadith we spoke about nasiha, about having sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and etc., all the different categories. And the last one is to the general masses of the Muslims. Because as a Muslim, you want the best for your Muslim brother. And part of that is putting yourself in their shoes and saying, how can I help them? And now, to give a more like a different or a unique perspective maybe on this hadith, or a unique application at least. So it's not a repetition of points you've heard before. There's an ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَخْشَى الَّذِينَ لَوْ تَرَكُوا مِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّةً ضِعَافًا. So let the guardians be as concerned as they would if they were to leave helpless children behind. خَافُوا عَلَيْهِمْ فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. So let them be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and speak equitably. The reason why I'm mentioning this hadith, or mentioning this ayah in the context of this hadith, is because part of also loving for your brother what you love for yourself is actually applied in your family. And not just in your direct family that's alive right now, but also the family you might have in the future. And what's the point I'm trying to get at? It's the following, right? We all want, or should want at least, a family that is practicing Islam properly. When we think of our future, we think of the family we want to build also, we want a family that follows Islam properly. And if we didn't grow up in this environment where we practice Islam properly, or more specifically, we're taught Islam properly, that's something that's like a source of of regret or sadness for us sometimes, right? That you wish you were raised in a house that properly taught Islam, that was built upon taqwa. And again, it's important to mention here that this doesn't mean that this regret is something that is dissatisfaction with the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not that you're dissatisfied with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for you, but rather this is a lesson that you take to apply or learn from for the future. That when you build a family, you want to give them what you didn't have. And this is something that's common among human beings in general, right? Like we see for non-Muslims, a lot of the times people who grew up poor, if they end up being rich, they want to give their kids the life that they couldn't have, right? The same thing applies to Muslims, but instead this idea of taqwa. So if you weren't raised in an environment that prioritizes Islam, you want your kids to be raised in an environment that prioritizes Islam. And this falls within loving for your brother what you love for yourself. That you don't want to leave behind children who, and if you were to pass away, they don't know how to even pray janazah over you. And if you think about that, if you leave behind a family or children, and people who never learned the deen properly, and maybe you learn the deen properly yourself and you have that within yourself, part of your love for your brother, what you love for yourself, part of your love for your fellow Muslims is that you want to spread that so that when you pass away, because that's something that will come, when you pass away, you leave behind children, and you leave behind offspring, you leave behind a family that practices Islam, that knows Islam, at least as well as you know new Islam, or even better. So that should be a goal that we keep in mind, and that should be something that we always strive for. And why are all these ahadith, and we'll finish off with this point, why are all these ahadith mentioning, like for example, this one says, لا يؤمن أحدكم, that none of you truly believes. The word truly, technically, I'm adding it in. If I translate directly, it says, لا يؤمن, that you do not believe. So here, there's like a nafi of iman. So it's like removing iman in this context, right? And to explain it, it's النفي بالإيمان يدل على الوجوب. Therefore, the removing of iman, or to say that iman is removed in this context, this leads to, or this is evidence for it being wajib, it being a requirement. So why are all these ahadith like min husn Islam al-mar'i, from the excellence of Islam, or la yu'minu ahadukum, that none of you believes, etc.? Why are they all given in this wording where it's tying very closely to iman? And of course we know that if someone falls short in these categories, it doesn't mean he's not Muslim. So that's an important point to understand. We covered this before in the first couple of hadith, but there's pillars of iman, and if someone falls short in the pillars of iman, then that person is on the border between Islam and kufr. But if someone falls short in these things, then this person is sinful, but he's not going into kufr. So why is the context or the way Rasulullah mentions this in a way where it's like nullifying iman? Well, this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran the same way. وَقَالَتْ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. That the Arab, they said that they just accepted Islam, and they said, آمَنَّا, we believe, we have iman now. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, don't say you have iman, but say أسلمنا, we become Muslim. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. But iman hasn't entered your hearts yet. So iman is a higher level in excellence of your Islam. It's a level that is given to a mu'min, to someone who truly believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who believes in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and acts upon it in its full capacity. And to end off with this point, because this is the month of Ramadan that's coming up, or if not starting tonight or tomorrow, the Quran, this is a point to reflect on reading the Quran. The Quran never mentions that Jannah has been promised for those who are Muslims. Of course, like I mentioned before, we know the hadith that I mentioned about whoever says La ilaha illallah enters Jannah, right? But the Quran never mentions that Jannah has been prepared for the Muslims. It always says muttaqeen, or the people of Iman, etc. Like for example, وَأُزْلِفَتِ الْجَنَّةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ غَيْرَ بَعِيدٍ. Jannah has been prepared for the muttaqeen, the people of taqwa, غَيْرَ بَعِيدٍ. إِنَّ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ مَفَازًا. That verily for the ones who have taqwa, they're the ones who are winning. تِلْكَ الدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ نَجْعَلُهَا لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُرِيدُونَ عُلُوًّا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فَسَادًا وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That after mentioning that this abode of akhirah is prepared for those who don't want to عُلُوًّا فِي الْأَرْضِ, it's like arrogance or to make themselves dominant over the land. وَلَا فَسَادًا, and not corruption. It says وَالْعَاقِبَةُ, in the end, the ending destination is for who? Not for al-Muslimin, it's for al-Muttaqin. So the point to reflect here is that these ahadith are mentioning traits of akhlaq, of adab, of morals and characteristics that are there, that must be there for someone who is of the people of taqwa. And like I mentioned before, the Quran, yes, we understand that a Muslim will, if he has the correct aqeedah, he dies upon that, and this person will enter Jannah. But Jannah has been promised for those who have taqwa. Jannah has been promised for those who have these characteristics. So that's why it's important for us to study these characteristics and try to embody them, inshallah. With that, inshallah, go ahead and stop. And if we have any questions or comments, we'll go ahead and answer.